Hello everyone and welcome back to Bitwig Studio and Music Production. This is lesson 4.04, and in this lesson we're going to talk about various routings, bussings, and grouping possibilities inside of Bitwig Studio. Typically, if you're a more intermediate to advanced user of the DAW, and by now we pretty much all are intermediate or advanced users, one of the things you want to do right away is figure out how your software application, how your host application routes audio around and how many possibilities there are for you to move audio from one place to another internally. We've held it off until now because we've only just in the last couple videos talked about parallel processing, and I think understanding parallel processing to the core is fundamental before getting into actually routing audio to different places. So now we're at that stage and now it's finally time to cover it. Now I haven't really done any prep for this video, so we're just going to see how it goes and see just how many possibilities we can come up with. Just remember that there's always many more ways than just one to do anything inside of programs as flexible as the modern day digital audio workstation. So just because I show you guys a few ways to move things around doesn't mean that there aren't more possibilities that you should try to explore on your own. So let's just jump in here and let's start with a basic audio track. And I'm going to pull up a sample. Let's go into the Beatport. Why not? I don't know what the hell trap step is. I might as well try it. We'll drop it in here. It's telling me it's 156. Very cool. So before we play this, just be aware of a few things. Your input and output settings, if you're working in the arrange view, you need to make sure that you have the mixer little panel here open, and then you need to make sure that you're showing the inputs and outputs, which is this selector down here. Okay? For what we're going to do right now, we also want to be able to see our effect send amounts. And if you click it and you're not actually seeing anything, you'll have to drag this up once we create an effect track. All right, so we're not seeing anything. Boom, I drag it up. We get our knob. We have a control over how much we want to send. And again, the effect tracks are working in a very similar send and return structure. So if I send from track 1, it will go into this return track, which in Bitwig they call effect tracks. Okay, very cool. I also have control right here. If I click on the track itself, I can do my sends. And just as a review of pre and post here, if I select pre and I click play, and I start to send, we're going to go really, really loud because this is not determining, it's not taking into account this fader. It's only looking at the audio data itself. So if I'm in post, for example, and I turn this all the way down to 0, this is probably how I should have explained it, and I click play, we're not going to hear anything. Now we can still see that there's data in this waveform, but when I'm in post, it is taking into account this last fader. So as I turn this up, and if it's really low, we'll just start to sneak a little bit of signal in there. Now on pre, it's exactly the opposite. If I turn pre on, we're getting overload signal. And it's taking into account this waveform right here. It's ignoring this last fader. So when are you going to want to pre? When are you going to want to be in pre, and when are you going to want to be in post? Like everything, it always depends. For the most time, or the most part, you're going to want to be in post because if you are trying to set levels equally, you will want the effect to be based on where this is going. So if you're deep into a mix and you like need to turn something down a little bit, you don't want to have to always go back and keep adjusting that send level. It will always be taking that into account, which is very helpful. So for right now, we'll just go post. We will create a reverb here. And we'll create some kind of delay here. Let's go into the reverb. I'll double click it. Create it, and let's just make something really quick. Doesn't really matter, so I should just speed up. Who cares? And for the sake of example, I'm just going to turn everything up 100%. And if I need to control levels, I can just control levels with the fader here in the effect track itself. So now we'll move into the delay. We'll grab a delay 2, and we'll just look for some kind of wacky preset. crushed to C. I'm not sure what that's going to sound like. Let's try it here. Okay, I kind of like that. I got to be careful about this one. It seems to be mixing into itself. I'm just going to add a little bit more. I'm going to add distortion, but I'm just going to put it after this effect. So I'm going to be distorting the delay, not working it inside of the internal possibilities here, but doing it just after the fact in a serial configuration. So we've already seen how the serial stuff works. Here we go. Okay, very cool. I'm happy enough with that. The only reason I'm adding this distortion is just so we can make all this a little bit more audible. All right, so now if I play back, we have our 2 effect tracks and we can bring those in as much as we want. Okay, very cool. Now, let's say for some reason we want to affect these 2 guys together. We want to affect the reverb and the delay. So maybe we want to add a compressor, maybe we want to add a flanger or a chorus. How are we going to go about doing that? In Bitwig, there's really only one way to do it. And I'll show you that way, but first let me show you guys something else. I'm going to create a new audio track. And now, normally if I want to route out this reverb, I should be able to go in here to my inputs and outputs, which show up over here, or if you're in the mixer, they'll show up, assuming that they're highlighted and you zoom up high enough. They'll show up here. If you're in the, what do they call this view? The clip launcher view, you can see all of that right here. Now, normally, if I went into this reverb track and I went to master, which is dictating where this is going out to, I should be able to set it to maybe one of these audio tracks, to audio 2, but obviously that's not showing up. But what is showing up is delay, which is another effect track. So perhaps what I could do is create a new effect track, call this one group comp. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to send the reverb, instead of from master to group comp, I'll take the delay and I'll send that to group comp as well. So now when I play back, let's take a listen to what's happening. And one thing I've noticed is you can't just solo the group itself. You also need to have the effect track soloed as well to actually control this level. The interesting thing about this is we're not actually like adding any level here. This fader is really dependent on these guys here. So if I turn the delay off, we'll lose the delay and we'll just have the reverb. So that's really, really important. So now we can actually control this group together if we want to. And so I'll go into the effect track itself, and I will add some kind of dynamics device. Why not? Let's play it back with it soloed, and now just so you guys can really hear it. So you can see now by looking at that level meter, we've really kind of compressed this. We're keeping it all at relatively the same level throughout. And now if I play back, The only two controls, assuming I have these levels set correctly, is my main audio track and then the group compressor I have here. Then the other cool thing is that I have a compressor on here and that it has a pretty steep ratio, and my threshold is down quite low. I can really crank either this reverb or delay, and I shouldn't worry about going into the reds. So that's pretty cool, but maybe now what I'd like to do is just record what's coming out of this group compressor. Maybe I'd want to get myself that sample to then manipulate and use in a different way. All right. The one issue with that is if we go over here, we're not really having access to any of these record buttons, and mainly that's because we don't have an input set. But let me show you guys one way that we can actually just record this into the arrange page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select audio 2 here. I'm going to go to my inputs and outputs, and in my input, I'm going to select the group compressor channel. And let's go, for this example, we'll do post fader. All right, we can turn on auto monitoring. I want that off because it's just going to give me a lot of feedback. I already know that this should work. I'm going to select the record button here. I'm going to arm that guy up. And now let me just test a couple different things here. Okay, so assuming all works properly, I should be recording this group compressor channel into audio 2 when I actually record enable. All right, here we go. I'm going to just turn the loop a little bit further so that we get that tail. And fingers crossed all this works. Okay, super cool. So now we have our group comp resampled. And so in most digital audio workstations, this is what, well, really just the technique itself is called resampling. We're taking something that's been affected and then we're getting the audio out of it. And in essence, we are resampling that to then use in our track. So now if I wanted to, I could mute the reverb, the delay, and the group. And if I play this back, it should sound like exactly the same as if these were unmuted. I could even turn off these sends. So hopefully you noticed it does sound a little bit different, and that's something I've always been trying to emphasize to you guys is even when you set everything up exactly the same, there will be some of those subtle nuanced differences. But if I was just solo this out, we could go in here and add a chorus. And then maybe add something like a frequency shifter. And I don't know, find something pitched up a lot. And now the really cool thing about this is if I wanted, I could now resend this back into my effects tracks because we're working with this on an audio track. So I can unsolo this. Again, I've turned all of these off. I'll go into the group and I'll send a little of this to the reverb. Send some of it to the delay. Okay, very cool. So we've done a lot of different routing possibilities just with that one little audio sample and really came out with something totally different. We could obviously go in here, mess with the stretch, mess with the pitch, do all sorts of fun stuff, and really create an entire composition or an atmosphere or some kind of just sound artsy track just doing some simple routings and using some of our effects and our knowledge about parallel processing. So the other thing I just want to show you guys quickly is how to bus or group a certain number of tracks together. And you probably already have an idea on how to do that just based on seeing what I've already showed you. But here's just a lame beat I made for the sake of example. We'll take a quick listen to it, and then we'll just route all of these drums into the same audio track. Okay, so probably not going to win any of awards, but that's okay for what we're going to do here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new audio track. All right, and now I'm going to call this my drum group. A lot of us have been very spoiled and have been working in Ableton Live for, the past few years. And inside of Ableton Live, I don't remember what version they added this, but they made it possible to group tracks. And I know Logic recently with Pro 10 now have the ability to create track stacks. And all that means is that you could take these audio tracks, I could highlight them all, I could right click and then select group tracks, and by doing that it would send all of those tracks through one bus, and that means that I could process that bus independently, and then I could still adjust my levels here. Well, obviously in any digital audio workstation that allows for routings, you can do the same thing. It's just a little bit more work, but honestly, I think it's a little more fulfilling because you honestly understand what you're doing as opposed to just the alchemy of right-clicking and selecting Command G. It's like people don't realize that you don't need that function. And so, yeah, it's nice to have it, but we can do the same thing in, just a couple more minutes. So I'm going to go in here to my kick, and for my output, I'm going to select the drum group. I'll go into the snare, select drum group. Don't forget, you can do the same thing from the, I keep forgetting what this is called, the clip launcher view, if that's where you are working most of the time. So I'll just show you guys both ways. Cool, and we'll keep our drum group route out to the master. So now if I click play and go to the beginning, you can tell we didn't add any level, but now we are starting to see some signal come through on the drum group track. And I can just turn this up if I want to make it louder overall. Okay, very cool. And now if I wanted to, I could do the old classic add a bus compressor here. Or whatever you feel like adding, it's really up to you. Remember, by doing this, you're not actually adding any extra signal. You can still control the relative levels within the tracks themselves. So if I really want to turn the kick down, I can do it. If I really want to turn it up, I could do that too. And I can still impact all of these guys independently. So if I wanted to add a specific reverb for the snare, I could do it on the track itself. Or if I wanted to put a little bit of extra grit on this kick, I could go in here and select the bit 8, and I don't know, maybe there's a good preset in here. Dirtifier, why not? Right, and that's not impacting the full signal as compared to going in here and then after the compressor adding a bit 8, selecting the Dirtifier preset, and now we'll hear how we've impacted the entire loop. Right, so those are a few ways of routing. Don't forget, you can do so much more with this than what I'm showing you. I really showed you a lot of different things in this video, only in one example for each case. Now, there's so many times when you're going to want to use these inputs and outputs to resample, and also sometimes you can do this if you need to save CPU. So if you have a crazy effects chain, you can resample it, save that project, create a new project, and then delete the track that has all of the clips on it, thus saving the CPU, but keeping that audio file. So if you do need to go back and make adjustments later to your plugin chain, you can still do that, but to save CPU in the moment, obviously you can bounce out and then do what you need to do. So I hope that was helpful for you guys. I really can't stress enough the importance of grasping this video because it's going to make your life a heck of a lot easier. And for those of you who have been saying, why is there no group function? Why is there no grouping? It's because you don't need that. That's honestly extra. You can do all of the routings internally and you get the exact same result. All right, thank you so much for watching, and you'll hear from me again in the next lesson. Take care.